You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We are still here with our reporters roundtable. Joining us, it's Brenden Moore with Lee Enterprises and Ben Szalinski with the Daily Line. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us. I wanted to have you on to talk about the things that didn't get done as well. And Ben, I'll start with you because we were waiting around the last morning there, wondering if the Prison Review Board reform was going to get passed. This was something that had huge bipartisan support. John Kern and Don Harmon both on it in the Senate. Kelly Cassidy was able to get 30 more sponsors added to it just to try to get this across the finish line, and it still did not even get called for a vote. What did you think of how that all transpired in that last night?
Right, the bipartisan support for it is probably one of the most interesting pieces because Representative Cassidy is one of the most progressive-minded Democrats here, especially on criminal justice reform. And she's leading this bill that is partially at least opposed by Governor Pritzker that would make these major reforms to the Prisoner Review Board, largely in the wake of a pretty horrific murder that happened in Chicago when the Prisoner Review Board voted to let a man out of prison, and literally the very next morning he went and tried to stab his ex-girlfriend, ended up killing her son. That really spurred lawmakers to action. They clearly saw that something had to be done because there's been so many negative headlines about the Prisoner Review Board the last few years. And what legislators did, they tried to put together this package of legislation that encompassed a lot of different ideas proposed by Democrats, domestic violence advocates, Republicans to improve transparency and processes on the board. And it seemed like it had a lot of good bipartisan support. The House passed one version of reform already this spring. The Senate made extra changes to that, passed out of there very easily. Goes to a House committee on Tuesday night, passes out of there very easily, and then we get hung up in the House on budget talks for hours and hours and hours on Wednesday morning, and we go home essentially without reform to Prisoner Review Board for several years in a row. I think it's really just interesting how the governor was pushing back against that proposal. He opposed some of the transparency pieces, such as live streaming some of these hearings. There's a lot of concerns that he had around the cost to do that, the technology to do that. I mean, live streaming is not the easiest thing in the world, but I guess his opposition to that is definitely notable, and it would have been really interesting to see a vote and how the governor would handle that through a veto, a mandatory veto, and if lawmakers would have come back in the fall and overridden that vote.
Yeah, and like you said, the governor's real opposition, it was interesting to hear the governor kind of saying that something was basically an unfunded mandate in the sense that's typically what he's getting a lot of the time. But that was really the argument we heard when he, on Wednesday morning when he had his post-session wrap-up. And Brenden, I thought it was very interesting on this matter to see this all kind of develop and to know the deal, something's happening behind the scenes. Because before Representative Cassidy got all of those additional sponsors on the bill had been referred to rules, which is known pretty well as kind of the graveyard in the House of Representatives. It looked like that wasn't going to move. They get all the sponsors, suddenly it has a committee hearing. Mm-hmm. Then you're wondering, is it going to get called for? Representative Cassidy definitely thought it was going to get called for a vote. Mm-hmm. Then we get into the hours and hours. Then we get into all the chaos of the House and the roll call votes and having to overturn rules and everything. And then all of a sudden, Welch is on the floor saying, "Hey, bye, everybody." Brenden, it was interesting to watch this kind of way to see a bill die at the end of a session.
It was 5 in the morning. It was 5 in the morning, and I think it would have been very hard to keep members there any longer. I think everybody was ready to go home, but I do think that there was, the speaker bought the governor some time. I think that this is something that he's not going to be able to avoid. I mean, when you have 76 co-sponsors on a bill in the House, I mean, more than a supermajority, everybody from Kelly Cassidy to the Freedom Caucus on the right, it'll get a vote at some point. It's just a matter of, is the governor gonna support it? Is he gonna issue a veto, a mandatory veto? Will he work with the legislature during the summer on language to make it workable for them? I mean, I think that the fact that you have all those co-sponsors, the fact that it had a committee hearing that was ready to go, I mean, that sends a message. That sends a message. I mean, the unanimous vote in the Senate sends a message. And obviously, we know that the governor and the Senate have butted heads on the prisoner review board. I mean, the Senate Democrats even, not just the Republicans. But the fact that in the House you have all that support shows that, I mean, this really is a executive versus legislative, issue. And it's just a matter of, is the governor going to get to a place where there's a proposal they can accept? Because I think he's going to get one way or the other. It
was the other bill that really took up a lot more real estate at the end of session than I was expecting it to at the time was one to essentially ban certain hemp and THC Delta-8 products. This was constantly being talked about at the end of session here. This was a Kimberly Lightford bill. Senator Lightford was pushing this, and it got a couple revisions at the end and then passed the Senate, but ultimately didn't even get through the House. The concerns were that people that work in these products, these are food products or drinks that have THC or have hemp products in them, and they effectively were arguing that this would be a total ban and would kill businesses. Ben, what did you, when you were tracking this issue throughout the last few days of session, what did you think about the way that this topic just wouldn't really go away through all these negotiations?
Right. It's kind of funny. It's the second year in a row it basically ended like this. Last year we saw similar pushes in the final days to regulate hemp. Those completely stalled out because last year it was opposition from the cannabis industry. This year it seems like the opposition from the hemp industry kind of pushed this off. So it passed really easily out of the Senate. I mean, I think it had one vote against it in the Senate. But it got to the House, and there's a lot more lawmakers in the House who were certainly more sensitive to the concerns of the folks in the hemp industry who really felt like as soon as the governor signed this bill, they were going out of business, even if their THC or hemp product was as simple as hand lotion. That's how strict the bill was to some of these folks. And I think it's just kind of interesting how, it's one of those House and Senate divides again, I think, that the Senate really saw a need to regulate this. They had a lot of concerns about the Delta-8 and the ability for children to buy these things at gas stations and whatnot. And it goes over the House, and it certainly didn't seem like it had enough votes. I think Representative Ford told another media outlet that there was not enough votes there in the House to even pass this bill, which is surprising, seeing the near unanimous support in the Senate. So I think a lot of the people in the House were really just concerned about the businesses, making sure that people's livelihoods weren't just going to be completely upended by this. And they really wanted a solution that is going to be the right answer. But seeing that this is 2 years in a row where there hasn't been some sort of regulation on this Delta-8 product that has a lot of people all across the board concerned, even those in the hemp industry, I think lawmakers are really going to be pushed to action in the coming months or next session for sure.
They had a hearing last week in the Senate where they were talking about this, and this was obviously something that Senator Lightford was extremely passionate about in the moment, and they had different industries kind of coming up, and there was actually a local brewery from here in Springfield that came forward. He was in the process of getting ready to launch this hemp-infused beer that he had for this, and he's like, look, I wouldn't be able to sell this if this passes. And then a few other industries came up, like Ben was saying, products that are sold in gas stations and stuff that have this in them, and the concern is that it has too much of the product in them. Emotions got high around this. I mean, we had Senator Lightford calling somebody a drug dealer in the middle of a Senate hearing. I mean, it was just so interesting to see this topic. And like Ben said, this has been around for a while, but to see it almost is like it got kind of tied up in all the emotions that were already going on in the building.
Right. I mean, as Ben said, this is people's livelihoods, and whether we like it or not, I mean, these businesses are in all of our communities, and they employ people, and they are livelihoods for people, small business owners. But at the same time, I mean, this is going on at the same time that, alongside a very heavily regulated, very heavily taxed cannabis industry. And the folks in that industry are like, hey, why are they able to sell this, some of these heavily intoxicating products when, they're not subject to the same taxes and the same regulations that we are. And so almost from a fairness perspective, it's like, it's fine if they want to if they want to sell it, but they have to get a license like we do. They have to be taxed like we do. And so I think that's why there's been a push from the cannabis industry of like, let's get some fairness. Let's let's get some regulations, because right now there really are not a lot of regulations. And there's always veto session, so maybe this issue will come back in the fall or maybe next spring. And obviously right now there are discussions happening in Washington with the Farm Bill, seeking to clarify some of the provisions from the last Farm Bill that legalized hemp nationwide. Congresswoman Mary Miller has a bill that would ban Delta 8 essentially, ban kind of do on the federal level what some want to do at the state level. So I think that's also what we'll see as well. I think you're going to see state lawmakers kind of take a look and see what they do at the federal level, and perhaps that'll inform kind of what they decide to do maybe in the fall or next spring.
Well, Brenden, Ben, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Cole.
Thank you, Cole.
That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you for joining us for all of our episodes through this spring legislative session. We look forward to bringing you more throughout the summer and the fall, heading into the November general election. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Henke.